Now, this is another part of your thesis. Very important again in the prospectus. Literature cited. Complete references the material that you have mentioned in the body of your thesis. This needs to be complete. This needs to be detailed. This needs to be perfect. Only thing in the world I believe needs to be perfect is your literature cited. The rest of it can have certain flaws in it. The literature cited, no. Why? Because all you are doing is reproducing addresses where this information can be found, which means you've got the complete address. All you have to do is get it down. If you can't get this down right, then how can I believe that anything else you did in your paper has any correct things in it? If this isn't perfect, then you got a problem, which means you do it right the first time and you save a lot of problems. Terms. Bibliography. Bibliography is a list of all the sources that you have used, whether referenced or not, in the process of doing your research. So when you do a bibliography and you look through a lot of things and you pick up Mad Magazine and you're going out there, well, does this have anything in it? You have to reference it, whether or not you even mentioned it when you get out there and do your work. So you've got to look at it. Bibliography takes in everything, not just what was referenced. We've got references. References is a list of the source of information that can be documented. So if I used a paper out of the Ent Society of America, I have to be able to reference that. If I used a paper out of Plant and Soil, I reference that. And when you do it, anything that needs to be documented, and what needs to be documented in your literature review, everything, anything that needs to be documented has to have a reference to it. Rarely should you even have a sentence in the literature review that does not have a reference afterwards. And then that goes back in the last chapter in there that we call the references, or we might call it the literature cited. And the literature cited is a list of printed material, literature, that you use for specific reference in the work. Now, notice, references is a list of the source of information that can be documented. So you could have things on the web and stuff like that. You might have somebody who said something, literature cited, said, no, it's got to be printed. If it's not printed material, you really don't want it in there in your work. So when I did literature cited, we didn't have the internet back then, which meant everything I had was print media. And that was good because I didn't have anything questionable in it. Whereas nowadays, you've got all this other stuff and you have to be careful of what you've got. And normally, literature cited is the best way to go about this. Literature cited provides verifiable location of the content to which you are referring. If it's published, it's got an address in there, location of the content, we're looking at that. The new stuff, the DOIs, are very important because it tells you where it is. It's a good reference place for it. I've used obscure journals in the past, and sometimes just trying to verify something through them becomes very difficult. So, literature cited tells you exactly where the material came from. It avoids plagiarism because you're saying, this is somebody else's work. This is not my work. If you quote it directly, quotation marks. Otherwise, all you need is the concept that's going on with it. It's cited in bibliographic form. Remember, we were MLA, APA, AIBS. Does it matter which? No, you're going to use what the publisher wants. And sometimes they have some really weird ones, but it doesn't matter because it's going to be cited in bibliographic form saying, and you've got it all down there. So it's very defined. This is what I tell students. Look at where you want to publish. If you want to publish something in Plant and Soil, go after their way of citing these things. And that way you've got it right from the beginning. If you want to look at a different one, go look at theirs. Ent Society of America has their way. Soil Science Society of America has their way. Phytopath Zeitschrift has their way. Figure out which way you want it and go that way. Improper citation gives you an impression that you don't pay attention to detail. I have this pet peeve about citations. They will be correct, which means as long as I am reviewing papers, the citations will be correct. There should be zero mistakes in the literature cited. Because if you've got a mistake in there, it will stop somebody from looking at your paper and saying, hey, he does good work. Because if you can't get it right in the literature cited, what do you have? So literature cited comes down to a very important thing. Improper citation, you don't pay attention to detail. And if you don't pay attention to detail, it's a problem, which means you start out from the beginning. If you do it right the first time, you don't have to do it again. If you pay attention to detail, it'll come out marvelous in here. And there should be zero mistakes in the literature cited. When I worked in Brazil, I sat on many a thesis defense. And I didn't have anybody's thesis come up to me that I couldn't find at least a couple of mistakes per page of literature cited. I had a student come up, went for defense. She had 250 citations. And when we went to her defense, one of my colleagues came up beforehand and screamed at me because I wasted 8 hours of his day the day before because he was trying to find that mistake in her literature cited, and there were none. And that's 250 references. So you get it right the first time, especially nowadays. Back then we were doing things on typewriters. Nowadays you got these word processors, they get it all right. Or once you've got it, you can keep it right forever. So improper citation gives an impression and you don't pay attention to detail. That needs to be curbed. So when we're dealing with literature cited, this becomes a very important part of your thesis, because many times people go in there and look at it, and if you've got mistakes, I've seen stuff that comes out of FSU that's got mistakes in it. I myself don't tolerate mistakes in literature cited.